So welcome back. The first thing I'm going to ask you to do at your tables is, again, if you'd be good enough to lose the devices that have reappeared. And also, could you, each of you, hold on to the two objects that you chose. Set all the other objects aside. And place the sheet of A3 cards somewhere in the center of the table, please. So, I'd like to have your attention. I'm just going to ask you, as you did for the mindfulness practice, to sit back in your chair. So back straight but not rigid. Feet flat on the floor. No crossed legs, no crossed ankles. Hands resting very gently on the thighs or in the lap, as feels most comfortable. I'm just going to ask you to close your eyes again. We're just going to spend just 1 or 2 minutes bringing the mind back into the room. So any part of your attention that's still in the photograph, that's still in the cake display, any part of your attention that's in some email or something you've been reading, just try and bring all of those parts of the mind back into the body and to the breath. Just try and bring your full mind's attention back to the room. Being present with your own mind and being present and open to the minds in the mix here with you. And baby mind, most welcome. Right. So, when you're ready, you're welcome to open your eyes. And there are going to be two more parts to thinking through objects. But again, as I said before, these are devices for you to be able to observe your mind in real time. So just to practice a metacognitive awareness. So the object is the secondary layer of activity. The primary layer is really trying to become aware, or much more aware of how your mind is moving, what it's moving towards and what it's moving away from. Again, no right or wrong answers. This is just useful data for yourself about some of your mind's preferences and habits. So the first part I'm going to ask you to do individually, and then you're going to have a group activity, which is not a team building activity. I think I heard someone earlier sounding a bit nervous that there was some team building activity going to happen. You're safe from that. It might be a byproduct, but that's not the purpose. So, individually, if you could, each of you take the object you didn't relate to. And privately to yourself, try and purposely reframe the object so your mind can accept and accommodate. You don't have to agree with it. So, example, I hate this thing with a vengeance. It brings out the absolute worst of my prejudices about my assumptions about gender conditioning. So, I'm inclined to kind of take all of these toys and set fire to them. So for me to shift my mind, to open my mind more, I might consider this as if I imagine, say, a little girl who has nothing, has no toys, and if she was given this as a gift, it possibly could be a vehicle for her imagination, and it could be become something quite precious to her, and it could have value to her. Okay? So I still don't agree with it, but I can have my mind open enough to accept and accommodate another possible interpretation. As it turns out, does anyone know actually what this figure represents? Where it comes from? Does anyone know? Would anyone like to share? Would you be prepared to share with the group? Well, apparently, I was told this by a young man doing the audio-visual technological stuff at the NGA, that also has become some, cult kind of icon in some internet game. Right, okay. Anyway, apparently immensely popular with young men. So, kind of, challenge to assumptions. So, first thing, just take a few minutes privately with the object that your mind didn't relate to. Just try and make a purposeful effort to expand your mind and find a way of relating to the object. You don't have to agree with it, but just think about what value might this add somewhere. Is anyone willing to share with the larger group their reframing? Yes? Jessica, Vicky, microphones, please.
Hello.
Can you stand up, please? Let's enjoy the objects.
The object relate to is a sort of a wall. And I didn't know what it was at first, and I realised you put these three things together and make a wall. They were kind of nondescript objects at first. But I made a wall, and I put my pelican inside the wall. And then the pelican was kind of trapped. And I thought, I felt really sorry for the pelican. So then I realised you could flip the wall that way to make shelter. So I had to bring the pelican to stay there.
Thank you. Great minds think alike. There were some people over on this side.
I picked this up as the object that was of no interest to you all, and that's why I think about the car as well as this. I'm not doing my purpose. And then people looked at it and said, I can do that. That was even message. I just now thought, what's the it's real?
I picked the baby dummy and I'm going to touch it now.
Has been sterilised, I know that.
But yeah, I didn't really consider it relate to babies. And then I had the revelation that dummies stop babies from crying.
And there are a couple of people over here on the right, so if we could just hear from a couple of people here.
My object was a champagne cage thing because this thing is a tap narrow. It's really no design. This is a really beautiful function. So that's why I didn't really relate to it. It's quite easy to turn around though because it was contained.
My object was this kind of leftover lotion container. I did not like it because it's trash. It should be thrown out. It has no purpose. But actually, in sharing this object with my group, Sarah said that she actually really likes this type of lotion. It smells really nice. So I started thinking that it's empty, so it is kind of trash. But at some point, somebody enjoyed all the lotion that was in here, so that's quite nice.
We'll just take one more over here, and then we'll move on.
I wanted to just pick up on something a bit like that. I have this enormously lovely, right, really co-op. Anybody else?
No, there's only one.
So, I needed to support my table. So, with the help of people on the table, we included potentially some kind of trying to make a line group too. There was no other completion of the Australian animals. But the point I really wanted to make was I couldn't do it on my own. It looks a bit like it only did the help of the group and sort of
And thank you for that point, because going back to the idea that culture is a product of human minds, we aren't producing it on our own. It is a collective project, and we are all co-creators. So, and in terms of getting the mind to expand and become more spacious, then yes, there's a valuable meeting of minds and helping us helping each other to expand our worldview. So thank you for that. I'm going to ask you now to work as a group at your tables using the two objects that each of you have chosen. I'm going to ask you as a group and use the A3 sheet of card. I'd like you all to bring whatever number of objects you've got. If there's 8 people at the table, you're going to have 16 objects. I'd like you to bring all of those objects together in some composition on the sheet of card that makes sense to all of you as a group. So bring these objects that you relate to, don't relate to, possibly can relate to, into some kind of composition, relationship with each other. Now you might need to stand up to work. And again, remember, the main point of the activity is observing your mind in the dynamic. Jessica and Vicky are going to go around and they're going to add another object into the mix for you. So you have to accommodate a surprise object as well. So I'm just going to repeat that Vicky and Jessica are going to go around and they're going to add a surprise object into the mix for each of you. So there's something else you have to accommodate. attention back, please. Okay. Who would, for the benefit of the all the minds in the room, who would be willing to share something with the whole group about their observations of the dynamic and process of bringing these disparate elements into relationship with each other? So we've got microphones nearest there, so then let's start there and we'll come here. Thank you. Is the microphone on? Okay.
You hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Our process was first try to square things in sequence. Then lots of it. I don't know, let's form my cut. And Andrew, let's look at far. That was beautiful. Look at the patient. Then we realised this is all the stereotypes.
Thank you.
Our process was somewhat similar in that we started off by classifying our objects. So we have all the natural objects on one side of the paper, and all the things you can stack into towers on the other side. And the really creepy thing that we didn't like, we could put it to a container and put something on top so we didn't have to see it. And then that slowly developed from just straight classifying to a narrative. And so we ended up with a very creepy story.
Would you care to share?
Sure. I have to try and hold up the object. So we have a slightly creepy keyring, which apparently was how our two protagonists met in a key party. This only gets worse.
Okay. Am I going to regret this?
Yes. There were oysters and champagne involved. At the beach. There was a tent. The chap lost his virginity. However, as a responsible human being, 9 months later he got into his car and steered his way towards the place where there was a water bird. I'm not sure I want to touch that. The lady friend. Joins the world. There is another unliked toy and a more interesting top to keep the baby occupied.
Did any other group find a narrative emerging, and that's how you brought that together?
Yeah. So, the reason I pressed that microphone was to reinforce what Carla just said. Was immediately everybody started classifying the various objects on the table. And I'm not sure if that's because we're all astronomers or it's by a neurological behavior. And then I reproduced my neurological behavior of being a boy and immediately started trying to stack things on top of each other to see how all and put the shampoo page on top of the little piece of glass on top of the board, and I thought, that looks like a lighthouse, will make it taller. And then the rest of the table, at that point, I was satisfied. At that point, the rest of the table ran away with the story.
So the lighthouse plants there, the book represented the university. It was very colourful. Then we created a lot of things in nature, some animals and things, including the elephant that was given to us, which we were delighted about. We advanced as a society and created planes, toys for children, and of course as a byproduct we created rubbish.
Did any group have a completely different approach?
So we didn't do any classifying whatsoever. So we're here today to tell you about the story of the cockatoo. And once upon a time was a very happy cockatoo. And then one day he discovered that he had uranium in his backyard. And this is where it all goes downhill because he decided to mine the uranium. I'm not going to take the uranium because it's the base of a very large monument. He's built the uranium because it's brought him riches, which is why he's wearing a big bell around his neck now, because he's really rich. He must tell everybody that he's rich. So he built a town around the uranium mine, but then it was full of radioactive junk that he had to put in the tip at the end of his town, way at the end of his town. But then at some point realized he can't mine the uranium on his own. So he got some workers who very quickly turned into slaves. And I don't know why they're so evil, but everything is awful here. But the cockatoo is really happy about the slave workers and the money he's built uranium that he loves so much because he's brought him riches. And he's kind of sad for the cockatoo because he's turned into a terrible, terrible person. But at the same time, look, he's really happy with his bell. So I don't know who can blame him.
Can you use the production of the city region so it was the Ali was very described, Ali was probably all the then we got that around we got the other to then there was an ash, which I did, and then we evolved for our people, so yeah, it's just here, and then we just
It's Instagram if you want
I don't think that if you like it, just
Are there any observations anyone was able to make at that meta level of how your mind was responding and working? You know, how inclusive you might, or open you might have felt your mind to be, how spacious, you know, did you participate? Did you kind of not include yourself? Did you sit back? Did you let someone else lead the way?
So, our table here.
Yes.
I felt like, this is purely my observation,
Yes.
I felt like all of us are literally for the 7. So the 7 head became immediately the central object.
Yeah.
Because it's a small child, girls. I don't know if that was because the nurturing instinct kicked in or what. Table doesn't necessarily nurturing. But it was just one of those things that seemed to resonate right at the centre of it. And then we immediately began to create a pleasant environment that's so now it has a body in the heart, and it's at the beach, and it's in the science park, and it has a lovely tree with kookaburra, and so
there's even a dog, so with the bell. So I think it's immediately this wonderful environment.
So it sounds like an act of redemption over there in the corner.
Continuing on with that, sorry. Continuing on with the 7 head, we kind of had the same idea because we had a torso and stuff. So we like made him this wonderful ruler, gave him a head, and had a science to put a rocket to 7 up spaces for the world. And we also continue on with the whole shelter idea. So we had a shelter. This torso wants to just give me this almost good time. Like, yeah.
On our table, we were sort of jumped straight into classifying things. I think it's inbuilt to a lot of us. And then I personally was a bit sort of confronted, it's not the right word, but suddenly new objects were placed in there. It was like, oh, you know, what's that doing there? This is my initial reaction. But we were given marbles, and I think a lot of us associated with them sort of celestial bodies with exoplanets or in our own solar system. So then we built a sort of universe with Earth and lots of other interesting things.
And what happened? So what was the next part in your mind saying, "Oh, what's that doing there?" So there's some kind of surprise or resistance, and then what happened? Then what did your mind do?
See the possibility of use that and we didn't have one particular, in my view, we didn't have one particular object that we built up and we were building our story around, and then actually the new object was the seed for our narrative.
Okay.
Yeah, so just to follow up if you understand. So we kind of like, I guess we went with the idea of structuring things around this celestial body, we came up with. Gillian said that this is kind of like spectral classification. Like what's happening. And we also had we had the Ned Kelly from looking back. And he was like the closed-minded observer, kind of looking at things angrily. Then we had the complex observer who was looking at things and kind of trying to understand it. It was fun.
So you heard where we ended up with our narrative, but the process I thought was kind of interesting because initially we were all quite individualistic, classifying each other little corner groups with each other and doing our classifications, and then I'm not even sure when it happened, but we just started to. Yes, it was when we actually were given the new object came in, and then suddenly attacked it, came together as a team and started to think. Do with it, and very naturally in the narrative concept, every time we got another step in the narrative, it was like a uniform, yay, I just got right, and more ideas sort of came from it. So even to the extent of removing an object, which we sort of subtly reduced, because it just didn't feel right with the story. So, and all of us took part in that by the end, except for the guy who's filming us as a change. So that's not on YouTube, which is terrifying. So our section.
So the surprise object obviously symbolises the unknown and the things we don't choose, the things we just have to accommodate. And you can see from that can actually be quite a useful disruption to a kind of dynamic that's settled in or a pattern, and something quite different can emerge. That's not to say it's better or worse than what's gone before, but that it's not fixed. There are options then. So the space opens and other possibilities can arise. I'm sure we could spend a lot more time talking about this, and I'd really like to hear from more, but in the interest of people having lunch at the reasonable time, I'd like to just ask what is your mind making, but what dots are being connected in your mind between what you're experiencing here and working to relate to different objects and accommodate them as a group, and what you've heard and the whole topic of being here for this 2-day session.
I think for me it was the importance of narrative. The sense of belonging came from each contributing to that story. And I think that in much of our lives, actually, it is creating a narrative, a story that leads from one thing to the other that we're each part of, that I'll take away from this exercise.
Thank you.
And on top of that, what I got out of this was highly metaphorical. I think the things that we keep are obviously they mean something to us, or they mean something to us, we develop a narrative. But I think introducing a new object is sort of like coming across the challenge that you might, and this goes with mindfulness, from what I understand about it, is something might actually challenge you, and instead of reacting in a way that is a first level reaction, you're actually able to use it as a different perspective, as a challenge to actually be overcome, and I guess as a skill builder, as an opportunity. So when we had our new object, we didn't go, oh, we don't want that, and that's not part of our story. We actually just incorporated it. We saw it as an opportunity, and I think, I know personally, I could definitely benefit from that when I'm challenged with my views, or have a conversation, or fall over, or any of those things. To see it as an actual opportunity to go, well, I can learn from this, the fact that it's actually annoying you right now is just my mind telling me that I still haven't learned what an opportunity this is to move on.
Thank you.
Inclusion is different, and coexistence is non-inclusion in because you might have it to have an increase in the two different issues. The other thing is is even within that. But people choose to not, people who are local, choose not to have that argument with each other because they feel themselves to be even working to each other. So people can have very different opinions about those things. But I was just trying to have the money. Then another issue is in that time, it's really trying to write it down. And the reason is in relation to the immigration. It's overwhelming. Attitude. So it's just really interesting to me that I've been thinking quite a lot about
that. Anyone else willing to share dots they're connecting, given the topic and purpose of the 2-day workshop, with observations you've made of yourself? Thank you.
I think for our table it was wonderful how quickly all of us were just able to jump in and say what our opinion was, which I think is really, in this new environment, everybody felt included, which I think is maybe tying into creating an inclusive environment for everyone, and how everybody can contribute in an inclusive environment, and nobody felt, oh, what are they going to think about where I want to put this window? Is this, so I think that was really good.
It occurs to me that, yes, these groups and talking about these objects, we were very inclusive, and it was very, I don't think anybody was holding a very strong feeling of force and forward. But what you were saying earlier in the day, when these are ideas and these are opinions about a subject, I think the behavior is very different in that circumstance, and you feel more defensive and you get uptight and get upset when people don't want to do it your way. I think it's kind of trying, for me, it's trying to hold this thought and this relaxed atmosphere in that more charged situation.
Yeah, and this is where the mindfulness practices really help. And as, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but as you mentioned, so, you know, it enables us to kind of meet what first arises, you know, irritation, defensiveness, or what have you, and not attach to that, to allow that to kind of shift and open as well. So obviously the value of trying to experiencing it is that you have a kind of feeling and a sense for it, and then you know what is it that we're trying to kind of open more to here. And I know we're at 12 o'clock, so we'll just take a couple more, and then I'd like to wind up.
So the Murdoch Children's Research Institute actually holds regular mindfulness sessions. And they've been doing that for about the last 2 years now, and I think it's one of the most progressive things the Institute has done in raising awareness of these kinds of things. And it ties in with all of our influencing skills training and negotiation training and difficult conversations type of training and sort of controlling your emotions within those contexts, and it all relates back to cognitive behavioral therapy. But what I find interesting is, as a scientist, I am trained to be critical of others' views and critical of my own views when I'm interpreting the data. And I think that that's something just inherent to our training, that we're very much thought to pick apart everything else that we see and be quite skeptical. And I think that's very difficult. It's almost controversial in a way, or conflicting with an inclusive sort of a thinking and approach. Well, so I think that's something I'd really love to tie in with.
And again, remember, this isn't either or, it's expanding the mind's repertoire. So there are ways of thinking, you know, it's context specific, as we said at the start. So, you know, the way you may behave and respond and speak at one given moment with a given group of people may be entirely appropriate for that moment, and then the next behaving in exactly the same way an hour later in a different context with different people can be, you know, really unhelpful. So again, not right or wrong, but the question I would say offered to you is, is the way I'm being serving to open the space or close the space? Not, am I doing it right or doing it wrong? Because the same thing will have different effects in different contexts. Before, oh, please.
Yeah, so I think a similar point, because it struck me that this sort of exercise we've just done is in a way a very equalising sort of exercise. And it reminds me of games that we played with our children when I was 2 or 3 years old and I was learning to talk. And accepting a child can do in a very equal way in both of them. But it does seem to me, as the last speaker said, it's very different from what we do in our professional life, where it depends on a lot of expert knowledge and expert judgment. So I don't quite see how to connect those two.
Well, there are two things. There are a range. There's one thing. One is that the mind has a broad continuum of ways of knowing. It's not just intellectual and linguistic. So one way of knowing, say, around dealing with your area of expertise, you know, works very well. When it comes to building organisational culture and creating inclusive spaces, then there are other ways of knowing and being that are required, because it's a different proposition. This is about people's inner worlds. It's not about abstract material. So again, it's just trying to, in a very short time, bring awareness that there are different ways of thinking and knowing according to what is going on. We had a conversation at this table here in the break about confidence, and that, you know, confidence is not an intellectual proposition. You can't say, I feel confident, and be confident. You either feel confident or you don't. And the way to kind of build confidence and access confidence is you can't read a book on it. It's got to be experiential and felt ways of knowing. I'm going to, unfortunately, wind up now. And I'm going to ask you to leave the collages in place. And someone already dismantled theirs. Yeah. And what I would ask you to do is, as you're leaving, just take a moment to have a look at the different compositions and forms that have emerged. And I would like to leave you with this thought that may be helpful for you in terms of your individual and collective endeavours about creating more gender equity and more inclusive workplace culture. And that is that you, at each table, you've had more or less the same objects, minor variations. You've all done the same task, but when you have a look at the way you've brought these objects into relationship with each other, there is a huge difference. So there's one table right in my eye line over here where all of the objects have been brought together in one bunch. So it's one complete hybrid form. There are other tables where all of the objects have been spread out in a single plane. There are other tables where things have been stacked. Some people have used a narrative, some people have used a landscape or a scene. And what I would suggest to you is that this is a very neat visual representation of the idea that we can all be unified in our intention to create more inclusive workplace without being uniform in how we do it and how we act. Okay? So if you're going to remember one thing from today, unified, not uniform. Okay. So, thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for your attention and your engagement. And we will be, Jessica, Vicky and I will be hanging around a little bit to tidy up after you've gone. So if there are any questions or you'd like to ask, please feel free to do so. And if anyone's interested in further reading, there's 3 books over there that I would recommend to you.
I would like to thank Natalie and the team again for this quite interesting experience. I'm sure it was something very new for a majority of us. It was for me. It's now time for lunch. There's just a little less than 1 hour to get your lunch, so please don't go too far. And be back on time for Elizabeth Broderick's presentation at 1 o'clock. Thank you.